Good morning. Welcome to Living in the Light. Let us begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest Swamiji, help us to attune ourselves to your words as we read through your new dispensation. Help us to receive deep within ourselves not only the ideas, but the vibration and the spiritual understanding you are trying to convey. Help us in every way to draw closer to God and to Gurus. Om. Peace. Amen. So, we are reading through this little pamphlet called A New Dispensation, which I believe is available now as a PDF from wherever you're picking this up. So I've just been reading the paragraphs, and it's been very interesting to me. This was created in, I believe, 1983. That would be the timing that I would remember for other circumstances why he would have done this. This particular volume isn't dated, but he refers to finishing the path 6 years ago. So that's how I figured it out. Yesterday was extremely interesting for me because I realized as I was reading this that there are certain things here that I myself have never understood on the level of fully accepting it. For example, and this is mostly what we read about, he quotes from his own autobiography, The Path, the chapter called God Protects His Devotees. And Swami makes as an emphatic statement that the grace of Master, and Swami says from 30 years of experience and knowing thousands of people, that the Guru protects people. And I really, just reflecting on that all day yesterday, the question that I've been thinking about, especially in this year, 2020, the circumstances of our lives and my life at this particular time, I've said this in other contexts, have made the canvas of my consciousness uncluttered, more uncluttered than usual, so that it's more vividly apparent to me that all that I'm ever dealing with is my consciousness. Yes, I could have said that 50 years ago, but there's a vividness to it that is deepening during these months. And everything has come down to, do I really have faith in God? And if I really have faith in God, why would I be afraid of anything? And so just reading this comment where Swamiji really commits himself, stakes himself out on the commitment that Master protects his devotees. Do I really believe that? And what does protect mean? I never got around to saying yesterday because everything else just expanded out in front of me and I never got to it. But there's a particular letter of Master's, and now, of course, I'm going to have to try to figure out where it was. And the last time I made a statement about what Master said, I was never able to find the source. This time I hope I can. But Master talks about difficult times coming to the world. And I think I have his phrase right. But those who love God will be protected. And he doesn't explain it farther than that. So again, protected. Of course, what does protected mean? We won't be protected from the opportunity to learn lessons, karmic lessons that are appropriate for us, but from outright tragedy, as Swami describes it. Anyway, it's very interesting, and I have no answers. I'm just having a conversation. This is not called Answers for Living in the Light. This is just called Living in the Light. So now I'm going to go on to the next couple of paragraphs here. This section is called A Special Dispensation. Now, A special dispensation is a phrase that Master himself used to describe his mission. And I don't know if this was the first time that it was used, but Swami tells a story in, I believe, The Path, where this Indian man was traveling on a ship from India to America during the 20s, the 30s, some early time when Master was in America. And he had another guru, but on the ship he had a vision of Master. And when he came to America and saw Master's picture, he recognized him from the vision. The details of any of that, I don't remember Swami expressing, nor I don't remember them. So the young man came and met Master and was very touched by meeting him. Swami asked later, but he's not your disciple. He has another guru. Why did he have a vision of you? And Master said, this is a special dispensation. And it creates, it has special power. It has more energy than it would have in ordinary times. It has 5 avatars on the altar. So anyway, Master himself calls it a special dispensation. And Swami calls it a new dispensation, and this whole pamphlet is to explain it. So I'm not going to try to explain it anymore. So this section is called a special dispensation. I first noticed this extraordinary blessing, and he's referring to the blessing of being Master's disciple or through this ray of grace. He says earlier, much more than protection is involved. Divine power, inner security, joy, freedom from delusions, an ability to ride the storms of destiny instead of being driven helplessly, a sense of belonging meaningfully in the universal schemes of things. These are the things that Swami says are inherent in this ray of grace. I first noticed this extraordinary blessing while living as a monk at Mount Washington, the international headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, and serving as a minister at the SRF Church on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. Those who took up this path earnestly came in time to manifest a kind of inner radiance that I'd never beheld before in anyone else. What I saw was a kindness in their eyes, an inward joy. Everyone they met found it inspiring. Were these changes, I wondered, simply the fruit of meditation, of sharing with others on the path, of reawakened faith in God? At first, I could only ask the questions. Years later, in 1967, after founding Ananda Cooperative Village, which is what we called it then, I began to observe once again the same phenomenon. Visitors who took up this path earnestly changed in ways that seemed out of all proportion to the time they spent in meditation, sometimes in hardly a week. Traces of tension and worry would begin to vanish, inner joy to appear. Of Ananda members, I remember a visitor remarking, normally to meet even one such person would be enough to make one's whole day. But here, everywhere I look, I see people with this power to make my day. For many years, I've traveled the world, and almost everywhere, I've met followers of this path. Always, the story has been the same. Paramhansa Yogananda often said, this is a special dispensation. More and more over the years, I've come to realize what a wealth of divine promise he had packed into that simple statement. Now, Swamiji is writing this to disciples of this path. I'm talking to people who are listening to me because I'm a representative of Master and of Swamiji. I've actually come to realize as time passes, for a long time, Swami Kriyananda was the only direct disciple of Master who was readily available to the public and doing a large public work. Swami Kriyananda has passed away, Roy Davis has passed away, Bob Raymer, Peggy Dietz, Dayamata, Mrinalini Mata, Ananda Mata, Mira Mata, Jnana Mata, Rajasi. You go all down the list. certainly of prominent disciples, direct disciples of Master, and increasingly those who are less well known are also fading. They're just off the planet now. They're not out of our consciousness and they are not inaccessible, but they are no longer in their bodies on planet Earth. There are many of us still living who had deep, long-lasting direct contact with Swami Kriyananda, but of the founding generation, we're in our late 60s, moving into our 70s, those of us who are still here, and a lot of us too have died, although there hasn't been a mass exodus yet. And of that number, there are some of us who were highly trained for public work, but all the numbers are getting smaller and smaller. So here I am, and what I'm here to speak to is those who are interested in what I specially represent. I say that because I don't want you to hear this as sectarian. To talk about the power and the benefit of Master's grace in this world is just a state of fact. It's not a sectarian fact. It doesn't make us more important. It doesn't make others less important. It doesn't declare that there is no other. What Swami's trying to accomplish here is for those who are drawn to Master to help us to go as deeply as possible and above all to receive as deeply as possible the special dispensation that Master came to give. There's another reality that he doesn't necessarily address. I don't think he addresses it in here. We'll have to see. But it is a fact that millions of people have read Autobiography of a Yogi, and that almost anyone who finds themselves even slightly outside of traditional religious practice has read Autobiography of a Yogi, and many, in many countries, say that that book catalyzed their spiritual surge. And in another context, Swami writes, yet of all those people who look to Master with such gratitude, surprisingly few of them actually follow through to try to make him their pole star and to draw from him the ray of grace that he offers. And as Swami puts it, I believe this is an essay, maybe it appears in Religion in the New Age, maybe it's in some other writing of his. But he says simply, they go seeking, he said, when what they want is already right in front of them. So Swamiji is also trying to make those of us who are dedicated to being disciples and to sharing this teaching, to give us great confidence in our willingness and our responsibility to simply stand strong in the teachings that we know and to not try to tone them down from what our actual experience is in the interest of being ecumenical or something like that. Better instead to raise everyone else up in respect rather than try not to be strong in what we're doing. This also comes forward, and by now I've grown so accustomed to this, I don't even think about it until I see it in others. I'm not an expert in anything else, and I wouldn't even call myself an expert in these teachings, but I've certainly done my best to learn them as thoroughly as I can. So there's many people who are very knowledgeable about many other things. But what I do know of Master's teachings on healing and on education and on how to work with money and on creative art and so on, I feel that in Master's teachings, I can stand tall with anyone else, no matter what their field, no matter what their specialty. I might not be able to talk to them in their language, but I can have absolute confidence in the power of what I do know. And that's important because we need to be able to believe in what we're doing if we're going to have any magnetism to be able to help convert others, to help inspire others to embrace this path. So what I wanted to talk about here, which was very interesting, in 1987, I moved to Ananda Village in 1971 and lived there continuously until 1987. I traveled for the last few years that I lived there. My job, to a large extent, was to travel, to go to especially a few cities where now we have Ananda centers. But at that point, we just had Ananda meditation groups, and I was helping to sort of draw the energy together to make things happen. And for a couple of months, I had a place where I slept sometimes in San Francisco, but mostly it was a continuous 16 years of residence at Ananda Village. And then in 1987, Swami asked us to move to Palo Alto, where Ananda already had a center, and he asked us to take over leadership and see what we could develop here. And here I've been for ever since, which is quite a long time, over 3 decades. So when we came here, Ananda was Ananda Village. We had Ocean Song for a while, but that community folded. And we had a house in San Francisco. We had a house in Sacramento. We had a few Anandas here and there. But we didn't really have, once Ocean Song failed to materialize. Ocean Song succeeded wonderfully as a community, but we'd been invited there by the owners of the property with the promise that they would transfer ownership to us. And after 7 years, it became obvious that they were never going to be able to do that. And we did not agree on how we should go forward together, so we had to separate. But the idea of the urban centers was that they were primarily intended as places where sincere people would find Ananda and then move to Ananda Village if they were serious. So the thought form of urban communities was just in the ether. It was just beginning. Ashram houses, yes, but actual communities, no, we hadn't gotten there yet. So we started really trying to see how much of Ananda Village could be replicated. The ideal of community could be replicated. Ananta and Maria started in Sacramento, and we started here in Palo Alto at the same time. And the point of all of this is the same question that Swami is asking here was exactly the question that I had. Swami saw this certain power with Master at Mount Washington and saw it at Mount Washington even after Master passed. I had seen this power at Ananda Village. I had seen exactly what Swami describes because my position was always at the front door, either at the retreat or even away from Ananda Village, bringing people to the community. I was watching people start with Ananda and watching the way it developed. And there was a certain power in that community where I lived for 16 years. I called it, among other things, a magnetic honesty. One of the reasons Ananda has never had to have many rules. We have guidelines for conduct for Ananda members, but they're not really rules, they're guidelines for conduct. And Ananda's never had an elaborate system of governance or conflict resolution because we've simply never needed it. It just hasn't been necessary because there is a tangible power, and what I said a moment ago, what I call a magnetic honesty, that just, if you're in tune with it, you stay, you participate, and you find that rhythm. And if you're not in tune with it, the force of that magnetism itself inspires you to move on. And sometimes house cleanings, as we would sometimes think of them, actually for most of Ananda's history, about every 5 years there would be a house cleaning. In 1976, there was a forest fire. In 1981, Swami stopped being a monastic. There was something else in the middle there. I can't remember. Swami got married after that. There was something else in the middle there. Oh, 1986, and this may sound odd to you, Swami wrote The Festival of Light. And believe it or not, the Festival of Light prompted a house cleaning at Ananda. Oh, we're getting too organized. We're becoming just another institution. Master never had a Festival of Light. We're not being loyal to what Master wanted us to do. Excuse me for that kind of emphasis, but that would be how it was presented. People actually left because of the Festival of Light. In 1990, Swami changed our name to Ananda Church of Self-Realization and started writing a book about Master, which he called The Essence of Self-Realization, which caused us to be sued by SRF. 1994, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct. You are a cult and your leader is an abusive leader, meaning Kriyananda. That was filed. In 1998, that judgment went against us. By the year 2001, when it was all over, we had $13 million worth of debt because of these lawsuits. All of these caused people to decide that this wasn't their home. The way I described it in Light Bearer is, the community was always a moving target, and basically concentric circles of clarity of commitment, I would call it, because people would feel committed, but there was a necessity for that commitment to become clearer and clearer, and the outer rings were constantly in motion. But the way Ananda developed was that there would be a sort of steady movement toward the center of the community. And when a person really entered the center of the community, almost none left. I can count like this, and I think it's about that many people who actually got that far into commitment and then left. Many people came and went, but because they hadn't gotten to hear. But every so often, something would happen in this inner circle that would shift the magnetism to such an extent that there would just be this force that would go out in all directions, and everybody would have to make a decision about whether they felt the confidence to move in with that flow of energy, or whether this was the point of division. And as Swami put it, most people just moved on, and Ananda became an interesting event in their past. There were a few, as Swami described, upon whom Ananda had such a profound effect that they could never just leave it behind. They had to make it wrong. And those became what Swami called the shadow people, who worked hard to bring about our demise. Never successfully, but with great effort. So in all of that, there was always this force. And Swami talks about a look in the eyes, a certain kindness, a determination. There was this force. And in 1989, when we actually started the community that we're now living in and have been living in ever since, I was very curious. I had no expectation. I had no belief one way or another, but I was very curious to see what would happen. And I was very impressed. I was very impressed to see exactly that same power beginning to manifest through in a new physical location, in a new context. We were not living where Swami Kriyananda was. We were not a rural community. We lacked many of the realities that defined Ananda village, and therefore, in my mind, defined Ananda. But the same power was there. And the same, what I would still call the same magnetic honesty, even to this day, is here. That we still don't need to ritualize and formalize all the rules of Ananda, because there's a pulse. And those who are part of it recognize it and will go into it. And those who are not will not be drawn. And exactly the things that Swami says, there's a transforming power. I've watched people whose entire experience of Ananda has been in an urban center. They've never, done more than visit the village, which now, of course, all these decades later, these seem like odd questions, but they weren't odd at the time. It was clear the power was at Ananda village. Would it be present somewhere else? Is it possible to become completely dedicated and completely in tune with Master and manifest that from somewhere else in a completely other context? And so this is what Swami is talking about this power that we see running through. And it's also very interesting. Now, Swami Kriyananda was a brilliant leader, and he organized Ananda on an unusually decentralized basis, which is by no means the way a discipleship-oriented spiritual work would normally be organized. He organized it on a Dwapara Yuga basis, which is Dwapara is not the age of institutions. Dwapara is the age of individual inspiration. Swamiji himself was an extremely charismatic and powerful leader. And at the same time, he was not one who held power in his hands. He would give true power and decision making to anyone who was willing to accept the responsibility in the right spirit. He did not give leadership roles to people, and the way he put it, and the way it actually can be put, to people who wanted leadership roles. Now, that doesn't mean he imposed them on people who didn't want them. You don't want to be a leader at all, therefore you will be. What he meant by that was people who were looking to validate their own worth with external position. Swamiji always knew that that was totally the wrong spirit for Ananda. But he gave tremendous responsibility to anyone who showed the right spirit and was willing to take it. And as a consequence, unusual for spiritual organizations, by the time Swamiji left his body in 2013, there weren't just one or two, but there was a whole, I would almost say a whole generation, but there was a very large cadre of people who not only were capable, but were already exercising, and had been for many years, genuine responsibility on both material and spiritual levels for the progress of Master's work. And the power had been transferred. Not just the responsibility, but the power had gone with it, which is causing Ananda's trajectory, far from slowing and shrinking, as almost always happens in a spiritual organization after the single focused charismatic spiritual leader dies. In India, they just accept this as the given. They make no attempt to try to keep inspiration alive by institution. While the inspiration is living in whatever form it's living, then the ashram flourishes and the path flourishes. After the master dies, those disciples who themselves have the vibration can carry on in the Guru's name or in their own name. But eventually it's just expected that inspiration just wanes. And those who still connect directly with these great souls continue to do so. But in America, we tend to try to institutionalize. And Swamiji never made any attempt to institutionalize. In fact, exactly the opposite. It has to be run by the genuine magnetism. But Swami has been skillful in organizing, and Master has kept his promise. When Master said to Swamiji, I know every single thought that you think. Now, Master knew that because Swamiji had invited him to live inside his mind. He had opened his heart to him as a disciple. But Master said to Swami, I know every single thought that you think, because what happened was that Master corrected Swamiji for something he said when Swami was far away from Master. Just at a completely other event, Master was nowhere. He was miles away. And then he said to Swami very specifically, when you were with people who are skeptical of the spiritual path, don't talk to them about miracles. And Swami had tried to persuade some skeptical people to be interested in this path because of miracles. And Swami's response to Master, he didn't mind being corrected, but his response was, you knew. It's like, how did you know? And Swami was very new. And Master said, I know every single thought that you think. And when I heard that, I said to Swamiji, is that still true? And Swami then looked at me and then said in this tone of voice, of course. That's quite something. Again, these are the thoughts what are the implications of these thoughts if we wish to be guided? So what I have seen from the beginning, now decades have proven it, but from the beginning, to my delight, I don't say to my surprise, but it was an open book to me. It just transfers. You know that Master and Swamiji's grace are accessible to anyone who wants it. And that's what Swami's talking about in the next section of this that we'll read. He talks about some important keys that he's observed over these years about what we need to focus on in order to receive it. Because this is a special dispensation with tremendous power. And to all who received him, as St. John said about Christ, it seems to be the truth here as well. And what we are receiving, this is what Swamiji is trying to open our hearts and minds to. What we are receiving is so vast and so great that once we put our will onto this path, then infinity itself is open to us. Joy to you, my friends.